Okay, now I want to talk about the protests. Let's talk about the peaceful protests. Now I'm going to have to read this bit here, so I'm going to look away for a bit. So aside from the rioters and the looters and the arsonists, these protests, I mean just the people marching and walking with signs and the chanting, that group we're talking about. Not the people who come in and do the violence. I'm just talking about the protesters. Those protests are not peaceful. I have watched so many highly intelligent people speak about the stats, the crime data, that completely dismantles the message of that protest about black people being hunted by white racist cops. So in full podcasts, lay it out beautifully, all the facts, and then go on to say, but we still recognize people's right to peaceful protest. So they've just stated why this message of their protest is completely illegitimate, yet support the right to peacefully protest. I support the right for people to peacefully protest too, but not when the protest is based on a lie. I just haven't seen anyone make that point. They make the one point about the data and then the one point about the right to peacefully protest. But what about the connection of the data dismantles the actual protest, which means we're left with a protest based on bullshit. So now I will read this bit. The data shows that less unarmed black people are killed by police than white people. So this protest is already off to a shaky start. But this protest is based on how people feel, not what they know. So the point that I am making is that these protests are not legitimate and not peaceful. If your protest is based on a lie, is it peaceful? Can you lie peacefully? Isn't a lie an act of violence committed against the truth, against reality? Especially now when we know how most people just believe what the mainstream media tells them. As I've said before, I call them the slipstream media because facts just slip through their fingers. But this protest, based on this lie, hundreds of thousands, I don't know, what's the count? Millions of people have been conned into joining a protest that is telling us something that is not actually happening. It's much easier to start rioting, looting, and burning when you have people marching in the streets already, confronting the police, yelling, defund the police, abolish the police, all cops are bastards. That's part of that peaceful protest, apparently. And then these protests, they just seem to lay down cover like a smokescreen for the violent crime that comes in afterwards. Now these are two separate groups of people thinking they're on some virtuous march against tyranny, and then these Antifa assholes who come in and start beating the shit out of people, which I'm sure there's some cross-pollination between those groups of people who go, you know what, I'm going to stick around for the looting and the burning. I've got my matches on me. So isn't it ironic that the people who can't be bothered to look up the evidence that will completely blow their protest out of the water are the very same people who want the police defunded and abolished? The police. The group of people whose job it is to gather evidence and build cases, bring criminals to justice while defending the victims of crime. People who ignore evidence want to get rid of people who gather evidence. This is insane. So, because we've all seen those movies and TV shows where you have bad detectives, right, who are sloppy with evidence and they think the case is solved and then they want to move on to the next case, only to have our hero detective come in and make things very difficult for the status quo of the police station. And he actually wants to get the right man for the crime. These woke protesters and the media who back them are all bad detectives. Don't bother looking at the right evidence. Case solved. Start the protest. Let's go. Amateurs who can't be bothered doing their job right, flimsy, which goes for the media as well, flimsy case for a protest that has now laid ground for more crime to be ignored. Because one of the reasons why the news people do not want to condemn those riots is because they're closely connected to that protest. Because if the protest could actually prove that what they are against is actually happening, then I would be there. But it's not happening. It's a fantasy protest. It's a cosplay convention on the move based on fiction. And I would think that the legitimacy of a protest would mean the data and statistics would have to line up exactly with what people are actually protesting about. But apparently these so-called peaceful protests can be totally righteous while being completely unanchored from the facts. That's the thing. Facts aren't exciting. Feelings are exciting. Facts mean work has to be done. Acknowledging facts usually means someone has to own up to something that they have been getting away with, usually an admission or irresponsibility. Numbers have to be calculated. Results have to be arrived at. Results have to be confronted. Feelings mean you can make up your own results. Your own conclusions, your own made-up methods how to deal with those results. That's exciting. Feelings get the adrenaline pumping. Facts, unfortunately, don't get anything pumping other than the adrenaline that surges when one has to face said facts, when one gets the courage up enough to actually go towards the thing they're supposed to confront, to solve that problem. And the truth can be boring and difficult to deal with. If, on the other hand, the protests were about police brutality as a whole, no matter the skin color of the victim, then you might have some solid foundation for a legitimate protest. But they're not about that. Nothing in these protests has anything to do with any white people being victims of police brutality. None at all. And we don't know their names. Because the message is white cops hunt black men. None of these protesters know who Tony Timper was. A white person who died under the knee of a white cop. Watch that video. It's hideous. From 2016. And that was hidden for a couple of years. Or any of the names of the thousands of black people killed every year because of crime in the inner city communities. So when someone is deranged, facts are not going to bring them back to baseline. Like the analogy of, say, a cult. I've been watching this Nexium thing. You cannot get your daughter out of a cult by telling you love her, which is reality, because the cult member doesn't live in a reality. That telling her that you love her and that the cult is destroying her, that is not going to get her out of the cult. A lot of careful planning has gone into programming these woke folk, professors basically, have taught these young people to think like this. Stating this to the woke will not change their course, because their ship was set on a course with stories, not facts. They have been taught by their professors that, I know it's a cliche, but 2 + 2 = 5, and they've lapped it up. Your answer of the number 4 is of no use to them, because their ship is off to other lands. They've been taught that deviating from this course is to abandon a journey to the holy place where whatever the fuck is supposed to happen, I don't know where they're going. This is why people don't get why Tom Cruise will never leave the Church of Scientology. Yes, this has nothing to do with the culture war, but it's just an analogy. So Tom Cruise doesn't want to leave Scientology because he thinks he is Tom Cruise. He thinks he's Tom Cruise because of Scientology, because of that church. He thinks everything he is and everything he owns and everything he's gotten and the person he is because of that church. He does not believe that Tom Cruise exists inside himself without the church. So the thought of Tom Cruise leaving Scientology is like Tom Cruise leaving himself. This is how difficult it is to get the woke to walk away from their movement. And so the riots and the looting and the arson and the lies have all been blessed by this flotilla, this protest, this flotilla of bullshit. And also, even just me saying now, oh my, how dare I condemn this protest? I love protests, but I love them when they're based in fact and reality. What is the point of marching against something that's not happening? I mean, I know the media has convinced you that it's happening, but it isn't happening. You know, the magic show is over. We go back home to our reality And these people have gone to a magic show and then they've not left the stage. They just start the protest on stage. I mean, it's time to go home. These protests are the sedative for the nation to lull themselves into sleep mode so that the rioting and looting and arson can operate as a dazzling fireworks display to be celebrated by the left-stream media, or the slipstream media. There's nothing peaceful about chanting "no peace." The people who want peace are in Chicago, Ferguson, Baltimore, Portland. I don't mean the heroic criminals that we're supposed to worship. I mean everyday man, woman and child just trying to get by under the volley of bullets. They're the ones who have no peace. There's nothing peaceful about demanding justice, or there will be no peace, while you swarm diners at a restaurant and intimidate them into raising a fist for your bullshit cause. The so-called peaceful protests are the quiet before the riots. You would think it might be difficult to keep up and maintain lying to yourself, but when you're surrounded by comrades doing the same exact thing, it's not only easy, but incredibly seductive and empowering. So something to add to the protest thing. So that sort of smokescreen thing that the virtuous protest lay down, not on purpose, but when the rioters move in, it's kind of like, you know, the late night talk shows where they have like a warm-up guy. It's as if the protesters are the warm-up guy for the riots to come in, warm up the crowd, and then the rioters just move in and say, oh, so is this building taken? Has this head been caved in yet? Has this business been destroyed? We just happen to be here. We have all our equipment and tools. I mean, I'll read from my iPad here. So the police have a job to make sure some of us don't ruin it for all of us. That's all they do. They have to be a force of brutality. I don't mean the implementation of brutality. I mean the threat of brutality to deter criminals. Otherwise, what's the point? A culture of resisting arrest and a culture of resisting education, plus the Democrats' culture of ignoring the problem, is why the world is in shit right now. They want to obfuscate and distract you from the completely obscene record of culpability in this mess by pointing at Trump. That footage early on in the riots in New York, where that black woman is yelling ferociously at the white police officer, punching the shit out of him, and he knows he can't do a thing about it because the world's eyes are on him. And then fortunately his black partner punches her in the face, knocking her to the ground, is symbolic of what these Democrat leaders have done to their communities. They are literally restraining that white officer, which they have labeled the enemy, so the woke can use him as a punching bag.